He's telling you have to, even though you think you do, right? But that will be their explanation, that's choice, just like you don't have to own a home, you can rent. So you have to eat to live. So they will stay away from certain things because they know that that's gonna be difficult. You also wanna understand that sales tax isn't just something that's like tangible, like a pack of cigarettes or I'm taxing you on gasoline at the pump, it's something that I can, touch. It also is on services. So you could tax for, and you do get taxed, if you're buying a home, or I'm selling my home and then I'm buying another one, in that transaction with your mortgage company or your bank, they're handling this through the land transfer company. There's a lot of tax on there that you're paying to make the transfer happen, if you notice it or not. Your agent's gonna tell you what check you gotta bring to cover this cost. Or, if you have a smart agent, they'll tell you to negotiate those costs in the sale, so you don't have additional costs. This is a great one that I put here, because I wanted folks to understand that it is outdated. A lot of our tax stuff, so when you hear tax codes are outdated right now, you're hearing that all through your politicians, especially Paul Ryan, your House Majority Leader. He's saying that because he is correct. It hasn't been upgraded since the 1930s, I kid you not. Since the New Deal with FDR. It has not been touched federally. So what's happening is, and this is a great example I thought would give to you to get your head around it, is if you buy a massage chair, you're gonna get taxed on it. But if I pay for a massage therapy in the massage chair, I'm not getting taxed. Because they haven't modernized certain things to upgrade it that there should both be taxed. So they're finding there's a lot of loopholes that are hitting the same product or services, and it's not fair to the average taxpayer. They need to kind of balance that a little bit, and then one won't get hit harder than the other. Especially if you're in these industries, it's not fair because people shy away from your services because you have more costs versus another service. Most online purchases are tax-free, but they have, I put an example here because I wanted you to see that with Amazon. Big glorious monster of glory that Amazon is, they're miraculous to me. They have to pay state and local companies, they lost their appeal because originally you weren't paying online because it was just new and they didn't know how to tackle it and they didn't update things. This they started having with the Supreme Court, this was an issue. So they started looking at companies that have physical facilities in certain states have to pay taxes, like their distribution areas, even though Amazon's online, they have the product somewhere. I see trucks driving all the time, right, with Prime. And on top of that, you now will notice some of your online, ask what state you're in, right? Where are you shopping from? And then all of a sudden your shipping and handling changes quickly, right? If you want to preview what your shipping's gonna cost, they're like, what zip code you got? Not only are they doing that, they're doing that to know how to tax you, basically. Not just shipping and handling, but also you'll notice your tax amount is there, a miscellaneous. That's what that is. So they've learned that now they have to tax you according to where the recipient's address is. If you are somebody that does exchanges on eBay, you will see it. Because they were getting around it. So the seller will pay tax according to where they're shipping from now. So they had to modernize some of this because of the boom of online shopping. I mean, that's just, your retailers are going out because this is so popular. You have grocery companies, Amazon included, doing all your groceries to your door. I do it. There's nothing better than coming home and Prime is on your doorstep. We don't have to go. Drag the damn cat litter and all that around. My husband's like, I can't believe you. I'm like, you don't shop. I do. It's a pain in the neck. You're in like heels and stuff, and you got a cart with like all this clunky stuff. When they don't charge you, if you're a member, right, shipping, why wouldn't I have all the heavy stuff shipped to me for free?
Yeah.
Just common sense. Bring it in the door. How lovely. Done. But they're capitalizing on that, and Amazon's one of them, along with they're now into retail clothing. Because people just don't have time. Property. So here's choice number 2, a state or local government will use to obtain revenue. Property's number 2, they'll look at, almost all goes to local government. So versus going right to Harrisburg, your property taxes are gonna stay within your county. They are, and that's gonna be predominantly your school districts. We're gonna get money that way. And we talked about this before, that's why sometimes you have some school districts with more resources than others. People shop around for homes. They'll come down in the Lehigh Valley area and go, oh, I wanna be a Nazareth, I wanna be a Nazareth. I have my kids in Nazareth. And then another one will go, oh, I have to be in Parkland and Emmaus. I have to. Because they've seen the marble flooring and all the lovely perks that they have in some of their schools and their stadiums, because they have more property tax. Higher income people living in those neighborhoods to contribute. Which is also an argument with property. You get all the money, but does that scale set up better schools than other schools? And is that fair? But it all stays localized, based on home or condo owner paying close to 1.15 of worth each year. So I did a little math for you to give you this. Pennsylvania is 1.2, like the majority of states are. So if I have a home, that'd be lovely to have a $100,000 home. But if you had a $100,000 home, as they increase now, the average homeowner is going to be assessed to pay $1,200 of that per year. Usually split into 2 bills. The smaller one in the spring and a huge one at Christmas time. And how they do this, they assess your home by your acreage, and they look at your square footage of your home, and then the property value overall. They'll come out and assess your home, or they'll do an appraisal at the bank. So they will assess this number, and then they will take 1.2% of that. If you have kids or not, you're paying it. So that's what the big chunk. So for some people it struggles. So most people, I will tell you right now, play in Pennsylvania in a middle income. I'll say middle income. Both spouses are working, middle income, not high end, are on the average paying about $7,000 a year in our areas. So most of the homes, especially out in the Nazareth and Emmaus area, they are paying close to $10,000 and $12,000 a year out of their money to live in that house. And they're gonna say, it stinks because I own it, but I have to give up that money every time in something I own, is the argument of the homeowner. Now, the people will argue against renters. And I'll say, yeah, but it still has to come from who owns it. So the landlord has to pay it, so they're gonna gouge your rent and make it go up because this went up. So it affects you either way.
I think back to the question that you asked earlier about like taking property tax, because it's set up like good versus bad school districts. I think it absolutely does, because like 2 examples. So I went to high school for like the first years. I went to high school in South Side of Chicago. And if you can imagine, there's not a huge revenue base there, because most of those people are renters to people who like own property like all over the place. And then I went to a school, I graduated from school in this state that had like a huge tax base, and like, you know, they had abundant amount of money.
Yeah.
And you could tell the difference in the quality of the schools. And on top of that, when you have things like what they used to call red line districts, where they would put people of color in like these little like neighborhoods, and they would set up their schools so they were, you know, a lot less, you know, they had a lot less resources for textbooks and all other stuff. So I think absolutely, I think properties are the only reason we have inequality in schools, is because, you know, people who live out in places like Emmaus and like Parkland, like, you know, they can afford it. They have bigger houses, they have more land, they can afford it.
And it goes both ways.
Right.
Because you're gonna move where the good school is.
Right.
Nobody wants to live where the crummy school is.
Right, because nobody wants to like live in an area and try to like fix the school.
So more people move there, and then it builds it even higher.
Or if you have charter schools, then you have people that are like, no, like, you know, like we'll pay a little bit toward the, you know, public school, most of that money, then they get a voucher and they pay it toward whatever charter school they want to put their kid in. So it crumbles the base of the public education more.
And especially in the urban populations, 'cause what happens is if I have a school district, that I don't like, now I'm gonna send them across town to
Yeah,
try to
like
get them
bus
into
it,
the
yeah.
other one.
Yeah, you
But
talk-
then that school can only have so many, so they only have so many seats, and that's when you hear about the lottery system.
Yeah, no, they did that in Chicago, because they used to bus people like.
I will
outside
show
the
you
lawns.
something when we get to education later on,
Yeah,
that you cannot believe happens in America.
yeah,
That you got 12 kids out of thousands trying to get those 12 seats.
Yeah.
Literally, they are
No.
using a bingo machine,
yeah, I've
and
seen,
you cannot believe it. And they get one shot, and if they miss it, they're on a track. And that determines their life for a lot of them.
yeah,
You're stuck in that school, in that environment.
right,
And then parents will work 3 jobs just so they can take them on subways to get them to the other private school then, and I have to pay for it now. And that's where you have this argument between liberals and conservatives, because they will argue and say that's why they want a voucher system, because they want that if I don't like my school, I can use that credit towards a private school.
see, to me, that's bullshit, cause
Or homeschooling or cyber,
I feel
whatever you
like-
want.
I feel like for all the money they would spend on implementing a voucher system, they could
Mhm.
literally just put that, fix these public schools that need fixed, you know what I mean? And like improve the community, and like, they don't wanna do that, they just wanna get these profit-based schools and make more money. There's a lot of the conservatives who want
And as
voucher
much
systems
as
are
your
investing in it.
American public wants to help, when it comes down to helping, they'll say,
Oh, not
well,
me.
I don't wanna take away from my school district money
Yeah, it's,
to
or
help
like,
that
yeah, they'll throw up
school.
their hands, say it's
That's not my
responsibility,
problem,
yeah.
but on paper, they were like, oh, the kids need our help, but then when it actually happens, they
Yeah.
don't wanna share the money, right?
Yeah, 'cause
And
God-
schools don't wanna share the money. We do it with community colleges.
Yeah, 'cause
We
God-
all fight over the same funding,
yeah,
and then you end up going there lobbying against each other like you're enemies.
which is.
Like you have to steal from Lycoming and you have to steal from Harrisburg Community College.
Right, like,
You have to pitch it so they don't get it, and how horrible is that, that
It's
the
like the
students
Hunger
that need
Games,
it as
yeah,
bad as
no.
you might have lost that bet. But that's how it works, it's terrible. That's why the education system is in the toilet in almost the 30s compared to the rest of the world, because it's so broken.
I used to live in Tennessee, the Memphis area,
Mhm.
and at the time when we first moved there, they were mixing the, basically the suburbs school district with the inner city Memphis school
Mhm.
district. So I first went to the Arlington High School, it was a public school, 30 minutes from downtown Memphis. And so when they started mixing it, my family pulled out, we moved to the county over.
Mhm.
I think property taxes was 1/4 of what it was in Shelby County,
Mhm.
and I like the school better actually, in more rural areas, but there's definitely a lot less students. I mean, it went from like 4,000 to,
Now, rural can benefit because there's less, just
yeah.
in numbers. So they, even if they have
Okay.
less resources, they can cater their teaching and
Mhm.
styles to the handful in their classroom.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely
So-
more focused on students.
Rural, not just with education, healthcare could be anything, they're so used to doing without that they become resourceful themselves. That's why you have the red and blue states so divided,
Yeah.
because they're used to not getting entitlements. They lose it because they don't have the numbers to prove that they should have them. So just by that, census alone, they don't get funding for things. So they learn to rely on community. You're hearing that argument a lot now, especially with the hurricane stuff. We don't feel like waiting, so we're gonna start helping each other. I got a boat, you got a hammer, let's do this.
They should.
And that's what happens predominantly in rural America, because they're so used to that culture that they don't have anything. That they have to learn trades themselves to be able to fix a car, because there's no shop for 2 hours away, you know? So it's culturally different for a lot of things. Income tax, third most significant. Conceals more than it reveals. income tax, it's hidden, it's in there. The average American, this just went up, pays $983 per year out of their check. They love, don't you love that little stub that's attached to your damn check? And you're like, I made this. No, I didn't.
Yeah.
And you see it all taken out and you're like, oh my God. And you're like, I basically just got half of my hours paid for, right? Happens to everybody. Maybe part-time, full-time, it's painful. It hurts. And the worst part is they itemize. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. Because then it starts like stacking all the categories and then some you don't even know what they mean. And then if you do things like, I donate to the United Way, they do payroll deductions, then you have like nonprofits that you donate to, like itemized with it. And then you're like, oh, I was really generous, because now I got 5. I didn't know I was doing that. But you start looking at that whole row, right? And then it's deducted from the total, and you're like, wow. You were gonna say something?
Well,
You were gonna
you
say
guys is up first.
I was just gonna say, like, I don't get that. Like, they take so much money out of people that barely make anything, checks, and then expect them to like donate to like all these other things, and they barely even have it to put up. Period. Even for like the cost of living, it's just like it just doesn't make sense to me.
Seems like a lot, yes.
Yeah.
And that is the argument, the double dipping of taking, state and federal, are they both taking money that is going to the same pot? Am I getting hit twice, like double tapped? Because there is that duplication sometimes, maybe law enforcement, maybe roads and highways. People don't know who's making the assessment and doing that, and they feel that there should be a surplus at this point. And then when they see that we're in a deficit, right? And states are in deficits on top of the federal, they're like, well, where does it all go? Why does it keep going up, but we're not increasing? So it's only as good as the people that are making the decisions in the budget.
Let me, so do you think, like, for you example, like when you look at your pay stub, like, would you feel better about looking at that list and seeing all these taxes taken out? Would you feel better like if the government like were more responsible with the money and there was like less like wasteful spending and all that? Like, would you feel better about having your taxes taken out, or would it still make you like?
I feel 100% better.
Okay.
I'm all about accountability.
No, definitely. No, I'm just wondering, because the reason I'm asking that then is to get to this point, which is like, why is the government then not more transparent? Like, why are we not requiring the government to be more transparent with what they do with our tax dollars?
They are, nobody reads it.
Where is it? I'm not trying to be like stupid.
No, you can go on the state website, you'll see all sorts of stuff, and you'll be like, glazed in about 2 minutes.
Oh, it's like that. Okay.
No, your government is extremely transparent. Your government's actually more transparent on all levels
It
than
just
any other
feels like-
country in the world.
Then why does it feel so?
It's just people don't wanna go look at it or go find it. Cause then when they go there, they're like sorry they even went there because it becomes more cumbersome. And you're sitting there going, oh God, and I don't understand this, and now I'm starting to get more anxiety because it looks worse than it is, I think. And then they start peeling back the layers and they're like, I don't understand it, because you don't have that person sitting there to translate what you're reading. A lot of it's legal jargon
Sure.
and accounting.
I got you.
The tough part is you have a representative government, so you have to vote for somebody who's gonna make these decisions the best they know how by being the expert on it. So you have to put your faith in somebody in voting time that is the most sound to do this. Because budget time, and you do it yearly in PA, those folks are deciding 30% here, 20 here, education more this year, roads this year. So that's why voting's really important. As much as we see all these names and we're like, their yard sign looked good. You just voted for this. And if that person is not capable of understanding this, it's very scary.
With income tax, like you said, when you get your check, it's you're like, oh man, I got like, let's say, I got like $1,200, and then you look and it's like, all right, this is deducted, this is deducted, this is deducted. You think it's a matter of like ethics and morality to have that number kind of like, not so much, already taken out, so all you see is the final product, like, if you had sales tax, that's already figured, do you think people would like, put up more of a fight with that, or like, less of a fight, because it's not, like, you're not seeing like, oh, this is what you could make, but now you
There
got
are-
taxes.
Republicans will argue if you do sales, they won't see it.
Right.
So they won't feel the hit, the average person. One day they'll buy more of this product, they get taxed on the other day, they're not buying it, it balances out. This you see every day, so people freak, the property tax you see every season. You have to come up with that, oh, I didn't save, now I need $7,000 by next week. That's what happens to them. And that's why houses foreclose, tax bill usually. But that's the argument on one side of the aisle. If you spread it out, like when I was talking about hospitality and things, you can even benefit on visitors into your state if you're a tourist area. Florida doesn't do a lot of these things because they have tourism. They have Disney World alone, in the middle of their state.
That's great.
Think of every hotel there around that park, one park, not even all the other parks. If I put a tax on everybody coming and going, who's got the bracelets, and they don't even know, because now they're genius that they go zip, and they get charged later, that one kills me now. My friend's family just got little bracelets, and I'm like, oh my God.
Yep.
It's just so crazy.
Yep.
It's genius on a marketing perspective, but when they do that, they don't see it. So you can actually get more revenue. Now the argument is this is consistent revenue. It's guaranteed. So if I'm more fiscally conservative, it's gonna be more your liberals are gonna say, I need consistency. That freaks me out of peaks and valleys with the market. So they know with property tax, your Democrats will say it's always going to be there if I do income and property taxes. Because I can forecast my budget, where you can't forecast. Now and this is always back and forth depending on who's in office, usually your Republicans will do away with it, like George W. did, and then Obama put it back in. People don't like being taxed when they're at their absolute low point of dealing with a funeral and the will and all those things, and to hear that you're gonna lose all your stuff really doesn't make people happy. For example, I will lose a certain percentage if I am donating all my inheritance and it's cash to my next of kin. A huge chunk goes to your government if you like it or not. And people get upset if it's in real estate, like a farm. Because now I gotta pay cash and write a check for that, or I gotta sell the farm to come up with that money. Yeah, it's not fun. So people argue, I worked my whole life to give this to my kid, and now the government's gonna take half. What is that? So people get upset, but if you are for this, you'll say, death is certain. It's horrible to say, but it is. So I can get from their last hurrah.
I thought the estate,
Death and taxes, they're certain.
I thought the estate tax only kicked in for like the highest 1% of people. I thought that estate
It's
tax
not
was
1%,
I
and
thought
it's
it
not
was-
much. And I'll tell you why it's not much, because if I liquidate and look at the house you own, maybe you have a small business,
Right.
all those things, they add up. And that's where it hits your middle class. Because what people think is the 1% or the 4% or whatever it is, depending on which state you're in, when you're in that bracket, if you add up and liquidate, because that's what your government will do, they'll do all your assets, just like when you do your taxes, you have to claim everything. You instantly are like, wow, I'm a millionaire, I didn't realize it. So,
I got you.
yeah, that's the problem, and that's what your Republican side will argue is, it's not the people you think it is. It's the guy that owns the pizza shop,
Because he's got,
because he's got a pizza shop worth $2 million in the building. But he's barely making it, you know what I mean, to pay the mortgage on the building and the kids at home and
his
the,
take home is small, but he's got a ton of
yeah,
assets.
that's
Yeah,
what I mean.
That's like my landlord, I got it, yeah.
Same with doctors. By the time they pay their overhead in Pennsylvania, of their insurance, their malpractice, they rent the space, pay staff, they're not making a lot if it's a family doctor. So a lot of these things are the argument on that side of, it's so easy to say there's this, percentage out there of wealthy. How do you interpret wealth? Is the argument. And what bracket, and I'm gonna show you the brackets in a minute. 32 states, they also do natural resources. So if I'm somebody that has something, like I gave Washington and Alaska as examples, that nobody else does, why not, right? All that lovely salmon, every time it leaves our state, you get hammered with a tax on it and we benefit, right? Same thing with all the natural resources. It's not fair to keep stealing from one area or one state, so we want some revenue on that. That's fair, right? So they offset costs by doing that. It's kind of like your retail. Somebody else from another state's vacationing in there and then you reap the benefits. I'm sending something out of state, so others are gonna pay for it. So it offsets the people that are residents, basically. Now you're all gonna move to that happens. That's why people do shop around for what state they wanna live in, because they are all different. Then there's also what they call, and your book will talk about, and this gets confusing, so I try to make it as basic as possible. Your insurance trust funds, they call it, that's how they do the expenditure. They don't call it tax. They call it insurance trust fund because of where the money's gonna go. So they'll take from utilities, liquor licenses, other things like fees for things. They don't call it a tax, they call it a fee. And then you'll also see this lovely thing in some of your paychecks to pay for the people that are processing everything for you, they call it. You pay that fee, you're all gonna go to your check now. And these are called insurance trust funds because of where they go. What happens on your check, and you will see these coded, you'll see unemployment, disability, and things taken out. And it's not with your tax, but it's in that line item. You will also see these being taken out of your check to help costs. And I'm not saying that might necessarily be paying for your Social Security, but it's going in the pot of Social Security.
We're not gonna Social Security.
So when people say loosely, I get unemployment because I paid into unemployment, it's mine and it's sitting there for me. They think it's like a savings account. No, it's a discretionary fund that if I'm the US government and I feel like, oh my God, we have to borrow from Social Security and pay for Medicare, we can do that. So when somebody says to you, I deserve unemployment because my money is sitting there for me, wrong. You're paying into unemployment hoping it's going to be used in the account of unemployment for everybody, but it's not sitting there for Joe Smith and here's your stipend. It doesn't work that way.
It's complicated. I was on unemployment
Yeah.
for a while, and I mean the amount
People
of
get big surprises when they do it.
work I had to do, and then the place contested it, and I had to go and have a hearing and the whole mess. And it took so long, like 6 months before I got, like they back-ended it all, and suddenly one day my account had this big amount, but it took 6 months. I would have starved to death if I didn't like have some money saved up because
And the
forever.
way
Then I had a
it's-
job like a
yeah,
month later,
and
so it was like, what was the point?
Your government kicks in, but your company kicks in, so that's why they're
Well,
fighting you so
yeah, they
hard,
tied me up.
because they don't wanna just shell out money either. So, they're sitting there to match it, going, and you're all suffering at the same time, that's what's happening.
Something similar was and is happening to me, like when I was put on medical leave, see, I don't get any money for medical leave. So they told me go to the Social Security office and apply for everything until you come back. And I applied for disability, unemployment, something like that, but they said I didn't have enough work credits for that. So then I
You
applied.
haven't put in enough to be able to
Yeah,
claim that.
because they weren't giving me any hours, and then they put me on medical leave and told me to go.
Well, you
apply
just
for
brought
it.
up something else.
Yeah,
People think that this is automatic
it's not.
because the government has to give me that. You just gave a great example. If you haven't contributed enough
Yeah.
through work, you don't get any. And
Yeah.
that's what they'll say to you.
So now
And people don't realize that, they get a big surprise. Or they don't realize some of these are clocked, depending on how it's filed, that when I get to be a senior, they'll remember you've already tapped into that.
Oh yeah, cause see, when I applied for
So it's
ethics,
not additional.
And they'll try to
Right, yeah.
prove you're not disabled.
They will
They'll try
track
to prove
how many
you're not.
times you have done this.
Yeah,
So people that try to rob this system and then think they're gonna do it later on, no. They'll say,
Yeah.
okay, we'll give it to you now, but
Yeah.
when you need it later on and you're saying that you want it now, you're not gonna get it again.
and SSI is a big fight for me, cause
Mhm.
I'm, like, I have to see another doctor in like 4 weeks, I just saw one, and filed and everything, but if, because I filed for disability under the age of like, what, 21 or something?
Mhm.
If my parents were to ever go on disability or social
Oh, yeah, you
security or
affect
anything,
them.
I get money too.
Yes.
Yeah, from there.
And that varies
whatever-
state to state.
Yeah.
All the things you're talking about,
Yeah.
there's not like a cookie cutter program for every state. Because of the funding,
Mhm.
they also have the discretion to figure out what they wanna do.
Oh, yeah.
Even with education, financial aid, they
Right.
do that in each state differently.
Right.
They have that discretion to use the tax dollars.
Yeah, but it's a huge big fight just to get
Mhm.
SSI. It's gonna take me like 6 months just to get it.
Then you have things called intergovernmental transfers. I love how they title these things. Funds provided by the federal government to the state. So we have to tap into you because we are going to be also allocating transfer funds from the federal to the state and have to compensate. So 65% are allocated to specific programs when you do this. So you may have Medicaid and the federal government helping Medicaid in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's paying into it and the federal government's paying into it for PA residents. That's what that means. Medicaid versus Medicare, everybody gets these confused. They're not interchangeable. And everybody's like, I don't remember which one's which. And that's an easy thing to do. So I put it here so you know. Medicaid, not everybody qualifies for it, okay? That is health insurance that was devised for low income and disabilities. When you hit your senior citizen age, depending on what that will be when you get there, is Medicare that will kick in for all seniors of a certain age. So not everybody can get this. You have to be low income or disabilities. You have to have a need. It's not a given. The other is because you're a senior and you've been putting money into it, like Social Security, you get Medicare and Social Security. Now I warn people, when you get to you're senior, and I'm watching my mother do hers. And she's like warning me every day. They're not gonna cover anything, so you gotta have a plan. I tell everybody, please have a plan, have a retirement plan. Get a job as a retirement plan, invest in a retirement plan, because if you try to live off of this later in life, you can't. Because your drugs aren't covered at the time, or it will also put you into, here's your choices. If you're somebody that wants carte blanche choices of surgeries, medical, drugs, all that, and when you're talking medical when you're a senior, you want the best, right? I don't want my parents to have the worst heart surgeon, I want the best. So to be able to afford the best, that's not gonna give you the best. So if you want the best, you gotta start saving now, because the government is never gonna pay you enough for the level of care you're probably ideally thinking of. Does that make sense? And you can't forecast what's gonna happen to you when you're 70. You might think now I don't have a lot of expenses, but something tragically could happen, you have to be ready for.
My mom was getting ticked off for a while because she thought the combination of my primary and my Medicaid was going to cover the entirety of my emergency room visit.
Best insurance plan will
Yeah.
cover it all.
There was still, because she thought she was going to get $150 in the mail for the copay as reimbursement, and
Oh,
she
yeah.
made me call the insurances, and I tracked down our claims, and I even looked at my insurance card, and I was like, well, that explains it right there. I don't know why I didn't look at the insurance card before. My primary insurance,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter if Medicaid covered most of the bill, because it picks up whatever my primary insurance doesn't cover, and there's still $150 copay for an emergency.
Your government, when they're arguing over healthcare, which they're still arguing over forever,
Yeah.
at this point, Why it's so complex and difficult is you've got one side of the aisle saying, besides constitutional rights, market-based, they're saying, if you do governmental, it'll never cover it. And you won't get enough people paying it. And it just happened, because your universal health care just plummeted, because they had the idea that people would voluntarily pay their mandates. Instead, they took the cheaper fine. Right? Especially, not to pick on college students, but you were what they were banking on to pay for the elderly who were sick. It didn't happen, everybody took the fine, which was a lot cheaper than the premium. And it went, "Er." So what they're doing now is trying to figure out, how do we balance this? The other side of the aisle will say, well, of course that was gonna happen, because you're never gonna have anything universal, because you have one price. The government telling you what it costs is going to keep it flatlined, that it's not gonna pay for all the private industry things like the drugs you're talking about. So it's
Oh,
always
yeah,
gonna be a
that's-
minimum.
that's-
You're always getting paid minimum from the government. So you can't afford all these fancy things. So they're saying, to afford the fancy things, you need to drive the market and have competitive pricing, so then they all balance out, and then you get coverage. So that's where the two sides are arguing. They want everybody to have healthcare, but they argue on how to do the healthcare, because they see it differently on, one is more market-based, just like we talked about the taxes, retail versus property, it's two different ideologies of how they think they wanna get it. So that surprises people. Now, when people do the old, let's compare, a socialist country to America, which I always die laughing, because you cannot compare Denmark to the United States.
It's just-
And you cannot compare England
It's
to
a
the United
lazy
States.
argument.
It's a horrible argument, because one is a centralized government and the other is a federal government. So you can't even compare the two.
Isn't Medicaid secondary though? Like you have to have primary insurance in order to get secondary? Like the Medicaid, cause that's what my parents had to do for me. My dad had primary insurance that I was covered under.
You have to tap that out first.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So when my dad's when I'm not covered
Yep.
under my dad's insurance anymore, then Medicaid is mine.
Right.
Unless I have my own.
If I work for an
insurance.
employer and I have Blue Cross and it's amazing, I can't just say I'm not gonna use that and then take the government.
Mhm.
You gotta use what you have as a benefit first, and then you supplement with what is left. That's how that works. Now, just to give you a little background of why it varies, we talked about this, of why certain states pick certain taxes and which ones they use. Because it does depend on your geography, your geology for your resources that you may have. It also will do economic cycles. We talked about the fluctuation in the market, your housing crisis, properties plummeted. Now you're not getting any income off of those for property tax, so that's gonna determine things. I thought what was fascinating is New York paid more per capita in state and local taxes than the resident of any state. Even if you're in upstate New York, you have lovely New York City in your state to cover. A hard population, a large population. So it's so concentrated, they have to make up the difference. When you have an overpopulated city in your state, it does get complicated. So they pay for a lot of taxes, entitlement programs for all that population, it's a lot.